What's going on, everybody? Whoa, that's very loud. So now I've tested you twice, making sure you're awake. Thank you, everyone, for coming. My name is Kevin Jones. I'm a developer relations engineer working for EdgeNode on the Graph protocol. I'm also a core member of the BuidlGuidl, working and supporting Scaffold ETH. If you guys have heard of Scaffold ETH, we're going to be talking about both those today. And I'm building something else really cool I'm going to talk about at the end as well. But the main focus, this is going to be a very fast talk because it's only 12 minutes, and I might blast you with some information, but hopefully you get something out of it. Well, first of all, I always ask, like, what was your journey into coming onto Ethereum as a builder, right? Maybe you're not a builder on Ethereum. I would assume probably a majority of you are building on chain, right? That's why we're here. For me, when I first got started, it was a little bit difficult to like sift through all the tools. You know, this was about 4 or 5 years ago. And I felt like coming from a Web 2 world where things are very established, it was very easy, right? With Web 2, you know, I used to work for Nginx, if anyone's heard of Nginx. And like building on Ethereum was a little bit of a struggle at first. But eventually and luckily, I found the BuidlGuidl. If anyone hasn't heard of the BuidlGuidl, it's a Wyoming DAO that helps incentivize builders to build on Ethereum by creating tools, education, content, supporting the Ethereum ecosystem. And my first entry was Speedrun Ethereum. Speedrun Ethereum was awesome because it was this very cool challenge-based tool that allowed you to do real-world scenarios on Ethereum from a learning perspective. Things like simple NFT, right? Like when NFTs kind of were a craze, you know, like teaching and learning how to do that was, you know, pretty easy, but this is a complete example of how you could do that in what they call challenges. And then additional things like learning how to stake, learning how to do token swaps, and even like later on, like things like building a DEX and more advanced challenges, right? And I think like learning by doing and like actually completing things is probably the most effective way. And so I was very inspired by that. And it's this very cool system, again, where you can like register on the platform, you can connect your wallet, you can complete challenges, and you can do this by submitting the Sepolia Etherscan link for the actual contract. And then you can also submit your Vercel application that you deployed to kind of verify that you've deployed the front end, and it would automatically grade you. Some of them are manual, but really still this really cool way of like educating through doing, right? Another cool thing is Scaffold ETH, right? So Scaffold ETH is a toolkit that allows you to build on Ethereum quickly. It's kind of a starter kit. If anyone hasn't heard of it, you should totally check it out, especially if you're working on hackathon projects or if you just want to prototype very quickly. And so that was a great kind of entryway. And on top of that, there is a special extension called the subgraph extension from the graph. So what this allows you to do is it allows you to still use the existing Scaffold ETH framework to build an application on Ethereum, but it gives you the power to build a subgraph and deploy and test subgraphs locally using a complete extension system. So by spinning it up very easily, you can just run npx create-eth at latest-e subgraph, and it will spin up a mono repo with Scaffold ETH, your chain that you decide to use. You can use Hardhat or Foundry, and your front end. So what was next? So like I was starting in the BuidlGuidl about 4 years ago, very passionate about building on Ethereum. I started to work for EdgeNode and started building tooling in the graph. I was very inspired by Adam Fuller, who was a product manager working in the graph. And I wanted to kind of build something that would encompass the same kind of style as what Speedrun Ethereum was. And this is what I came up with. Ready? Awesome. All right, so what is this? It's basically a kind of inspired by Ethereum, Speedrun Ethereum. It's called the Graph Builders Basecamp. You can go to basecamp.thegraph.com and check it out. But what it is it's a challenge-based, but we call them missions, that are essentially the same kind of style, right? You can come onto the application, and you can register, and you can complete missions to gain NFTs. So one of the things that was, I wouldn't say lacking, but with Speedrun Ethereum is like it still uses Web 2 infrastructure. And so I wanted to kind of improve on Speedrun Ethereum a little bit with some kind of cool way to integrate with the graph. And so I came up with this cool concept where we're still using scaffold ETH. We actually built it with scaffold ETH. But there's two main contracts. One is a standard ERC 1155 NFT contract, which handles all of the rewards for the missions. And then there is a validator.sol contract, which is basically hooked up to Chainlink functions. If anyone hasn't heard of Chainlink functions, what they do is they utilize the Oracle's decentralized network for Chainlink to run some computation off-chain and then bring those results back on-chain, which is super cool because we can build something essentially that would normally be done in a Web 2 way in a Web 3 way. So the architecture looks like something like this. We have scaffold ETH on the top, right? We have Next.js, typical React application. We still are deploying our smart contracts to Base, right? And we still are using the graph for all of the validation, right? So if a user comes on and they have to, build a subgraph and then deploy that subgraph to the studio is exposing that via GraphQL. If anyone hasn't heard of the graph is a GraphQL kind of entry point for what are called subgraphs. And we utilize the Chainlink decentralized Oracle network to do this kind of validation, right? So still using scaffold ETH, using the graph. We actually used the subgraph extension of scaffold ETH as well. And this is kind of what the flow looks like. So you can imagine you have an externally owned account that is connecting to the Graph Builder Basecamp. They're sending a request to this kind of main contract, right? So this is like the consumer contract is what Chainlink calls it. That Chainlink contract has an inherited contract that can then call the functions router contract. And so this is like a set contract address that takes in just a normal transaction called send request. And then that thing gets sent off after you send the function call to the functions router to a coordinator. Then that coordinator emits an event called an Oracle request. It's kind of hard to see. But what that does is when that event is fired off, all of the nodes in the entire Chainlink decentralized Oracle are kind of seeing this event happen. And they're taking all of the data that's coming off the event and processing it. So inside of that event, you're actually sending all of the source code for the validation that needs to happen, along with any parameters, right? So in this case, we're sending the user's wallet address, and then we're sending the mission that we want to validate against. The decentralized Oracle network then comes into a consensus, right, using the magic powers of Chainlink. And if you, by the way, if you have any secrets, you can also define those secrets in a secrets endpoint. In my case, it's all public information, so there's no API key or anything like that. You can just access it. But when that result comes back, it comes to the coordinator. The function router then takes this and makes a callback to the contract. And if you have any, you can actually put contracts in front of this consumer contract as well. So in that case, we have an NFT contract in here, and that would just do a callback and then mint that NFT. So this can all be done automated without any need for a server. Literally, you could just spin up the repo on your laptop and complete a mission all on chain, as long as you deploy a subgraph to the graph network. So it's open source. It's not on the Graph Protocol GitHub yet. Right now, it's just on my personal GitHub. So if you go to kmjones1979, you can go there. It's under Graph Builders Basecamp, and you can see what it looks like. There's basically a few contracts. They're very simple. Thank you. And it's very easy to spin this up. I think you just really need to. It's kind of difficult to set up the Chainlink contracts, I will say that, but there's really good documentation on the Chainlink website if you guys want to do this kind of scenario yourself. So how did it go? Well, we had 1,200 visitors from 60 countries use it over the last couple months. Actually, this is wrong, yeah, over the last couple months. We have 37 new builders that we've brought into the Graph ecosystem that we wouldn't normally have had. Altogether, there's been 71 missions that have been completed, and there's 7 builders that have completed all of the 4 missions. So pretty awesome. So how can we keep this going? Well, this is going to be very fast. So I'm building another cool program called Genesis. If anyone wants to take a look at it, please come message me afterwards or stop me. It's basically like an online tool for developers to connect. I'm utilizing the same thing in what are we called learn modules on Genesis, and these will be NFTs that you can learn for learning how to build on Ethereum, Solidity, Viper, whatever you want to do. There'll be these little modules in here to help boost the ecosystem. And yeah, and then you can see what it looks like here. It's pretty cool. And then there's a quiz functionality. So, sorry. There's a quiz functionality that is in a Web 2 way, but again, we meant this all on chain. So it's using Chainlink functions. So thank you so much, guys.